Not quite 1 euro, but heavily haggled. I've got the skill set. Renovate abandoned ruin from scratch. School holidays. I can live the dream in school holidays. I'm over 18. I'm not really in full-time education. It only takes you a year or two to realise that full-time teaching, saying the same thing to the curriculum on one subject, is going to drive you mental. And doing that for decades, you're going to get repetitive strain injury of the mind. That's without taking into account on task, make the right choices. Supply teaching brings much more variety. Variety in the students, variety in the places, variety in the drive to work. Respite from the politics of the petit bourgeois. But after 5 years of supply teaching, I'm bored of cover. I know it's a privilege and you're supposed to have a passion for teaching, but it's just boring. Children are boring. They've got no personality to speak of. They're so repetitive and predictable. School holidays, what about your own children, I hear cry. It's nice to, you think, that someone might want to breed
Grenier,
watch a bit more of the ball.
Loft space enclosed with the pitch
even the most avid of you in your heart of hearts would have second thoughts. I think it's partly my rigorous principles that I don't want to forsake for love's sake. I'm not particularly autistic or set in my ways or anything. I was an architect for a fair number of years and I've got a fair number of traits, but architecting as a profession after your several years of training and experience after, you can get disillusioned. Those architectural grand designs that you thought you might be doing and see other people publish are almost always family money and limited in prodigiousness. It's a bit like every person's got a book in them. A writer might say is a platitude. Creativity is another layer that gets added to an architectural process after function and the waste of political game playing. And that function, that machine for living in, all the interrelationships of the rooms, gets value engineered so tightly by the developer that the fabric of the spatial enclosure becomes hardly fit for purpose. The extravagances of volume that represent spatial delight soon start to be seen as such an extravagance, to the point of waste. Double height spaces inside outside. Someone's got to pay for it, and you'd prefer someone to pay for the design of it. But even if you, as the architect, do the extra over to provide the vision that could be funded with 10% extra over, so many of any developer's schemes that the architect is asked to look at are no more than, we have got planning permission for this on this site, we're going to sell it to you. Your architect might think that they can do better, but we've managed to get this, and we've added value. So your designs never see the light of day. Someone else looks at them and tweaks them to the point of unrecognisable, or obliterates the holistic vision. Details carried throughout and given meaning because of that just get thrown by the wayside, or hopefully the recycling basket. So here I am, as so many people do, investing in themselves. Good advice that I was given, I've made all my mistakes for someone else. Yes, everything's more expensive in Britain, true. Is planning and building control more highly regulated? Possibly, but negligible. But I've done it in Britain, and I want to stretch myself and do it in a language that I don't understand, with regulations that I've still got to get to know. And in terms of challenging myself, I need a new adventure. The adventure of architecture, yes. Teaching, yes. The third dimension. Join me on these studies of interpersonal graphic realities. Dream big. The Europe-wide searchers have me visiting, offering a punt. I've experienced the flush of acceptance and the fluid, remote pre-Brexit purchase process with the notary and a UK solicitor, which probably wouldn't be possible now. Vernacular architecture was one of the specialisms that I studied at master's level. This is basically sociology, and I have to confess that the barn, the grange, in its pure form is what's most interesting to me, and I feel a sense of shame that I am adapting that pure vernacular, owner-built agricultural form to needs of today. But ruins abandoned just deteriorate into a pile of stone quite quickly. Occupancy is a fairly loose phrase on a building like this, but it did have something of an ad hoc occasional use in the 1980s. Yes, as part of the search you do get some historical information, but it tends to only go back so far. And all those vernacular clues of what was built where, when, by whom, for what reason. The whys of what I see before me in built form speak to me. It's like evidence, and I'm the vernacular building detective. I can share this with you. I can share with you the interactions of the little animals that populate the potager from time to time. It's there upon the hill, little more than a blob in the earliest of photographs, when only the oldest tracks through the valley determine the pace of interaction with the outside world. I've shimmied up, bunked up through a hole in the wall and climbed down a ladder that I flipped to my advantage and found a 1930s roof that's good and stupendous down valley views. And the parrot in the cherry tree, a cherry tree that isn't supposed to get that big. All a bit surreptitious, but months later, 9 months of gestation, of purchase, my French local English-speaking notary has given me the go-ahead. And, those luggage padlocks? Well, that was keeping people out. Hammer and chisel, hammering it down from the U, I've made my way into my new property. First job, first day, though, is in the vaulted cellar, so sadly no secret cave of wine stockage, but lots of chewed and rotten wood, making goat, donkey, cow, horse hay troughs along one outside. The cows definitely got the better ones on the other side. And all those said same animals, when they generate their byproducts onto the concrete floor, shall we call it, and the timber parts of the floor, all still covered in sort of hay, you'd call it. The piss and the poo wings, and the concrete really doesn't take much breaking up into handleable pieces that you can then get rid of somewhere. But where do you get rid of it to? Turns out, after a little bit of the locals being nosy, there's such a thing as the déchetterie. There's many local déchetteries, but the only one that you don't need a residence card to visit is half an hour away in the nearest town, if you step on it. Not really prepared. I've scratched up all my arms, loading a tunnel, so I had to turn into a van. I'd always wanted to turn into a camper, and almost did as a project beforehand, but would now be so precious over. Most of the rotten wood I've kept piled up for use in fires in winter to keep me warm. There's something to start it, as a fire starter, kindling. I'm cautious though. Almost like a bench along the outside wall, on the inside of the outside wall, that the animals' mouths would have gone down to at the lowest point when the hay would sit. I've left, I can see it's just a little bit of concrete around a dry-stone wall of round river rocks. In the position that it's in, it could have some structural purpose. I need to think over that again. That part of the outside wall is 3 foot thick, without this bench, but it's a whole another van journey, another ton of effort. So it can wait. There's always another job, task, that wants to jump to the front of the queue. Is that need, or is that enthusiasm to rush on ahead? Well, too often throughout, this has been to keep the neighbours happy. I'm familiar with taking on a task at the front of the queue, pushing to the front of a queue to keep your mother or your partner happy, but neighbours? I suppose I'm new in town. I'm the fresh meat, and I've learnt how fresh meat gets received at every individual school that I've ever been sent to work. It can all go a bit crazy town quite quickly. So far I've got on my in a magic mic, and I've done the strip out of the cave. Ugh, ugh. Melusine is the nymph of this white water, fresh water. The Dauphine, the dolphin, is the human of the sea, equivalent, but secondary to man. While this is an introduction to a wine review, Melusine is sort of a freshwater mermaid. The Dauphine, Lyon, was, in the times of the Roi, the king, France's second city, Marseille not being part of France then. The Dauphine was the pretender to the throne, the second. Not quite €1, but heavily haggled. I've got the skill set. Renovate an abandoned ruin from scratch. School holidays. I can live the dream in school holidays. I'm over 18. I'm not really in full-time education. It only takes you a year or two to realise that full-time teaching, saying the same thing to the curriculum on one subject, is going to drive you mental. And doing that for decades, you're going to get repetitive strain injury of the mind. That's without taking into account on task, make the right choices. Supply teaching brings much more variety. Variety in the students, variety in the places, variety in the drive to work. Respite from the politics of the petit bourgeois. But after 5 years of supply teaching, I'm bored of cover. I know it's a privilege and you're supposed to have a passion for teaching, but it's just boring. Children are boring. They've got no personality to speak of, and they're so repetitive and predictable. School holidays? What about your own children, I hear you cry. It's nice to you think that someone might want to breed from me. Watch a bit more of the blog. And even the most avid of you in your heart of hearts would have second thoughts. I think it's partly my rigorous principles that I don't want to forsake for love's sake. I'm not particularly autistic or set in my ways or anything. I was an architect for a fair number of years and they've got a fair number of traits, but architecting as a profession after your several years of training and experience after, you can get disillusioned. Those architectural grand designs that you thought you might be doing and see other people publish are almost always found little money and limited in prodigiousness. It's a bit like every person's got a book in them. A writer might say is a platitude. Creativity is another layer that gets added to an architectural process after function and the waste of political game playing. And that function, that machine for living in, all the interrelationships of the rooms, gets value engineered so tightly by the developer that the fabric of the spatial enclosure becomes hardly fit for purpose. The extravagances of volume that represent spatial delight soon start to be seen as such an extravagance, to the point of waste. Double height spaces inside outside. Someone's got to pay for it and you'd prefer someone to pay for the design of it. But even if you as the architect do the extra over to provide the vision that could be funded with 10% extra over, so many of any developer's schemes that the architect is asked to look at are no more than, we have got planning permission for this on this site, we're going to sell it to you. Your architect might think that they can do better, but we've managed to get this and we've added value. So your designs never see the light of day. Someone else looks at them and tweaks them to the point of unrecognisable, or obliterates the holistic vision. Details carried throughout and given meaning because of that just get thrown by the wayside, or hopefully the recycling basket. So here I am, as so many people do, investing in themselves. Good advice that I was given, I've made all my mistakes for someone else. Yes, everything's more expensive in Britain, true. Is planning and building control more highly regulated? possibly, but negligible. But I've done it in Britain, and I want to stretch myself and do it in a language that I don't understand, with regulations that I've still got to get to know. And in terms of challenging myself, I need a new adventure. The adventure of architecture, yes. Teaching, yes. The third dimension. Join me on these studies of interpersonal graphic realities. Dream big. The Europe-wide searchers have me visiting, offering a punt. I've experienced the flush of acceptance and the fluid, remote pre-Brexit purchase process with the notary and a UK solicitor, which probably wouldn't be possible now. Vernacular architecture was one of the specialisms that I studied at master's level. This is basically sociology, and I have to confess that the barn, the Grange, in its pure form, is what's most interesting to me, and I feel a sense of shame that I am adapting that pure vernacular, owner-built, agricultural form to needs of today. But ruins abandoned just deteriorate into a pile of stone quite quickly. Occupancy is a fairly loose phrase on a building like this, but it did have something of an ad hoc occasional use in the 1980s. Yes, as part of the search you do get some historical information, but it tends to only go back so far. And all those vernacular clues of what was built where, when, by whom, for what reason. The whys of what I see before me in built form speak to me. It's like evidence, and I'm the vernacular building detective. I can share this with you. I can share with you the interactions of the little animals that populate the potager from time to time. It's there upon the hill, little more than a blob in the earliest of photographs, when only the oldest tracks through the valley determine the pace of interaction with the outside world. I've shimmied up, bunked up through a hole in the wall and climbed down a ladder that I flipped to my advantage and found a 1930s roof that's good and stupendous down valley views. And the parrot in the cherry tree, a cherry tree that isn't supposed to get that big. All a bit surreptitious, but months later, 9 months of gestation, of purchase, my French local English-speaking notary has given me the go-ahead. And, those luggage padlocks? Well, that was keeping people out. Hammer and chisel, hammering it down from the U, I've made my way into my new property. First job, first day, though, is in the vaulted cellar, so sadly no secret cave of wine stockage, but lots of chewed and rotten wood, making goat, donkey, cow, horse hay troughs along one outside. The cows definitely got the better ones on the other side. And all those said same animals, when they generate their byproducts onto the concrete floor, shall we call it, and the timber parts of the floor, all still covered in sort of hay, you'd call it. The piss and the poo wins, and the concrete really doesn't take much breaking up into handleable pieces that you can then get rid of somewhere. But where do you get rid of it to? Turns out, after a little bit of the locals being nosy, that there's such a thing as the déchetterie. There's many local déchetteries, but the only one that you don't need a residence card to visit is half an hour away in the nearest town, if you step on it. Not really prepared, I've scratched up all my arms, loading a ton or so at a time into the back of the van that I'd always wanted to turn into a camper and almost did as a project beforehand, but would now be so precious over. Most of the rotten wood I've kept piled up for use in fires in winter to keep me warm. There's something to start it as a fire starter. Kindling. I'm cautious though, almost like a bench along the outside wall, on the inside of the outside wall, that the animals' mouths would have gone down to at the lowest point when the hay would sit. I've left, I can see it's just a little bit of concrete around a dry stone wall of round river rocks. in the position that it's in, it could have some structural purpose. I need to think over that again. That part of the outside wall is 3 foot thick without this bench, but it's a whole another van journey, another ton of effort. So it can wait. There's always another task that wants to jump to the front of the queue. Is that need, or is that enthusiasm to rush on ahead? Well, too often throughout, this has been to keep the neighbours happy. I'm familiar with taking on a task at the front of the queue, pushing to the front of the queue to keep your mother or your partner happy, but neighbours? I suppose I'm new in town. I'm the fresh meat, and I've learnt how fresh meat gets received at every individual school that I've ever been sent to work. It can all go a bit crazy town quite quickly. So far I've got on my inner magic mic and I've done the strip out of the cave. Ugh, ugh.
But crafting things is supposed to be very good for your mental health. With such a big project, I must be very bon santé.
But enough about principles and strategy for now. Back to the experiential vernacular archaeology, the building that talks to me. Paleosociology, is that such a thing? In the potager, there's a stone tile, a triangular stone tile with the nail hole, peg hole, that's in the corner. This was obviously a roof tile once upon a time, but now there's 1930s clay interlocking roof tiles and a metal sheet on the other side. Profile sheet rather than wriggly tin. But the internal gable to an inhabitable part of the building as a whole, the triangular bit from apex down to eaves, is a hardwood post with round pole battens. There's the structure for vertical rough-sawn waney edge planks vertically that are fixed from the other side. And on the other side of the stone masonry wall that stops stretching flat from eaves to eaves. There's no party wall separation, no fire separation at all, really, at the gable. Just below this flat top wall on the second story, there's external quality flat render. Lime render only on that second story that looks the same as on parts of the outside of the building and was probably external at some time. There's a good chance that there was a lean-to roof at first floor level at some time. This then got built up to become a lean-to at second floor level. Now, there's a ridge beam and 2 big purlin beams that go straight on through, 1.5 by 1.5 and one end. The 3 beams are perched on top of a 3-metre column that's granite and lime stonework that's 1 metre by at least 2 foot thick, and then metre-wide voids between them. And then that little triangle beyond them where you can see the clerestory type level void continuing round at eaves level. These 3 beams have full integrity, the purlins and the ridge, and I'm quite keen on having some structural, not touching, but if ever there was a need, structure there at the end of my demise, just in case. But also, I want to have some separation between me and the other demise. Much of I love the vertical waney edge boarding to the gable. I want fire separation. I did have a little go of taking them in from the other side, but someone's put up sheathing ply over the face of them from the other side. I'd love to be able to see them, but I'm going to have to cover them up. High compressive strength thermalite blockwork and lots of rock wool will give me fire and thermal separation. And secondary structural support just in case. The other demise has got a hipped roof on it, not just a straight pitch roof like above me. The trees that make these purlins and ridge were only of a certain length, I think. They must be on some sort of stub wall beyond that is where the rake of the hip end roof starts. But there are 2 foot long stumpy bit of trees that stick out of the wall, allowing for the slope of the road, probably the floor levels of the other demise. Beams sitting on stonework, they're separated in each and every case by old shoe leather. This is quite good specification. It's also quite fascinating that you can see the shape of the quite small-ish shoe. I'd like to try and do something similar with the steel beams that I put back. On the ground floor on one side, there are beams and wood planks in a notch in the beam that is all on top side of the cellar vaulting. It would seem that cart horses and carts that could go in through the big barn doors, the top side of the vaulting was never supposed to resist such foot traffic. But there's no real signs that this extends over the next 2/3 of the ground floor area, just in the first third by the door, so the tools, the cart and the horse, as well, perhaps they were unharnessed there and taken round and down to the cave below, and the other 2/3 would have just been hay from its earliest single-storey lean-to life of the building. When would this possibly have been? Being that the gable, solid and voids are a metre, suggests that Napoleon's standardisation might have started, but then at lower level you get different standard form of measurement. The slightly smaller feet and inches that every different town had different weight and measure. But I've almost forgot to say about the roof. Not tiled and battened. Every course is nailed to waney edge boards. These are thick things. They'd be heavy, but they provide a bit of structure. Why they need to provide structure? Well, you need that because you don't really know where the stone diamond tiles would be going, and that's just the way it was done because of that. And there's another little piece of evidence. There's some of, well, they'd have had to be quite nimble. It's only one. There's about a 1.5 by 1.5 cutout where you can see just the board stop and then there's just tiles. You can remove these few tiles, and I have seen people walking around at the fairly gentle pitch, but still 40 degrees or something. People walk about on their pitched roofs. It's most unnerving to watch because you have to try and flatten yourself as much as possible, and just so you don't slip on most pitch roofs, don't you? But no, they're not on fours, they're just walking around on 2 feet. It must be like 35 degree pitch. They're not walking around up there for fun. I've seen it very rarely. It's for a purpose. It's not like a social space. But they're half expecting occasional tiles to be blown off by the Mistral winds or the Katabatic winds coming down at night from the mountains, and they'll have to pop one back on. Or you can only guess if they'll tie a rudimentary harness to one of those 2 king posts on the same truss. That's unusual. By British standards, unheard of. 2 king posts on the same truss, that's quite queer. But they do that a lot in France. And they talk about the English way. Big, chunky timbers to this truss, the tie beam, and it is only a tie beam, huge crack through it. Someone's put hard metal, tying it together at some point. I'm tempted. I've got some stainless steel wire that I might have a go with, less elegantly. I just don't want to take out any meat from the timbers and open it up to pine beetle lava or something. The bark beetle I understand you're quite safe from if it's aged timber, more than a couple of years old, a couple of 100 years old. This stuff will be fine. That clerestory void ventilation space, though, it both worries me and doesn't at the same time. Where there's the big wall void beneath on the back side, the south side, that should perhaps worry me more. I'm going to keep my eye out for a big catnip lintel that someone's no longer in need of for there. Yeah, sound like I'm dreaming, don't I? If you're keeping an eye out for what you know you need, things turn up. A scaffold. A scaffold is a scaffold. Eaves level all the way round. I think I'm going to want that before I go walking out onto any pitched roofs. But I will definitely be wanting a mezzanine level to take advantage of the roof space. All the ancient timbers, beautiful. 9 metre span of timbers. You go look on some structural charts if you want, but timber doesn't span 9 metres. You'd have to have laminated timber beams for that now. Glulam, now there's a good material source. Ingratiate myself to one of those manufacturers. Installers, contractors. Back to the big barn doors. And the door within a door. Surprisingly lightweight. Floor levels have risen over hundreds of years. The sill beam needs to be breathable or that's not going to survive. But how do you insulate this ancient, rustic double barn door? Its limits seem to be the 100mm, the 6 inches varying between those 2 goalpost frame around it. So a neat arrangement of round-headed bolts that you actually see from the outside like studs. Could fix through to a structure on the back, but it's got to be neat and regular and tidy. And suitably chunky. This part of France was Vichy in the Second World War. And this part of France was Italian. It had been the House of Savoy, based in Turin not long before that, so natural enough, and the occupying forces were too much trouble, really. Us around here, they weren't too much trouble for us around here, I had one chap saying. I'm saying this because there's this rectangular projection that's on a rock pinnacle, obviously, but sort of chest-height wall that really does look like it would have been a gun emplacement looking down over the valley at some point in time. I'm told it had a different function. But I'm also saying this because I don't think that the big barn doors, though the ironwork hinges, pin hinges I think on the frame are original, the doors I think will have been replaced at some point a long time ago, because they're like acid etched wood effect, but for real, where the acid etching exposes the grain, but there's no real grazing of grooves into the wood like dragging a cart or something past it would have done, like you see even on stone walls you get, don't you? I think heavier doors would have been replaced at some point, perhaps when the horse kicked them in. Don't leave me under this 1.5 metre eaves overhang. Well, that's another thing, that eaves overhang, exactly 1.5 metres. Very Napoleonic. The thin, tall rafters, hardwood strong, but underslinging any sort of ceiling, you don't have much to fix to, and they're not straight. It'd be difficult to predict where you're putting your screw. The downpipes, the guttering of the building, all rainwater from the gutters runs towards the other demise. There's no carrying the water away. Old roofs would have just dripped well away from the walls. The galvanised goes down to underground gullies at each end of the hip. You are nice and protected, even though it's 3 stories up, the eaves projection, you're nicely protected. Standing under there in warm rain with your bottle of wine, gazing down valley at approaching weather. Spring often seems to be a alternating blue skies day, rain the next, but always warm in spring, like t-shirt warm. So we're going round and down to the other floor levels. External floor levels have raised over time. Slightly more problematic area, the entrance to the double vaulted cellar, the cave as they call it, cave. Duck your head now. There's the threshold, and you're 9 inches down from that before you get to the internal floor level, but up on the outside, another 9 inches from the threshold, on the outside edge of the stone wall, there's the tarmac road level. I love the sound of rusty ironwork, heavy rusty ironwork when you're drawing a bolt or something, or chains. It's so atmospheric and looks so authentic and patina, the patina of age. Just inside the fairly flimsy cellar door, there's another 2 much heavier doors set to the side that aren't the right size, but perhaps someone thought they were at once upon a time, or they're from up top. There's a pretty authentic looking heavy filigree chair, not a pair, and feeding troughs of quality that are definitely staying there as a feature, and then a load of crap on the other side. So I got rid of all the crap floor, the crap wood, and underneath the poor quality concrete there's actual bedrock, like Flintstones, like actual bedrock. It's got a slope to it, like all the rivulets flow in one direction. Well, now if ever there was a music opportunity for background, now's it. And these sort of natural rivulets in the rock that flow towards a small 75mm formed in lime mortar, definitely human made, not rat. You can see that before the concrete even, someone was brushing all the piss and shit down to the one end of the barn and out through the external wall towards the potager, the vegetable garden. Now, there's a wall around this vegetable garden, about 1.2 metres tall. Without the tarmac, it'd be about 1.5 metres tall. It'd be head height to a short-ass mountain person. So, on the inside of this rubble rock, no lime in it, garden wall, There's 1.5 metres of soil now. The rudimentary lime pipe that extends through the 3-metre thick gable wall, to the vegetable potager is 1.5 metres down from current growing level. There is at least 1.5 metres deep of cow poo outside in the 18-metre long terraced garden. In the best quality concrete, which I've left, it steps up to the cow feeding stalls. There's a trough in the ground. I had kicked around the detritus and I'd found that it come to a stop, but I didn't really believe that somewhere there wouldn't be a pipe to the outside, a connection, but there isn't. When would have been the first rainwater and sewage pipe connections to this location? I think 1930s myself. I've asked Manel at the CCVA, but, well, perhaps she did try and find out for me. But this channel is shovel width. This is where, remember that gun emplacement? That isn't a gun emplacement, it's a trough for sort of 8 metre by 4 metre trough retaining wall for cow poo. Well, perhaps horse poo as well, perhaps a bit of goat. But all winter long, people would have been shovelling poo out of this trough, communal from the left-hand side and the right-hand side, and shoving it in the gun emplacement overlooking the valley. I'm sure they rested on their tall shovel handle from time to time and took it all in, but they were also throwing it over the garden wall and spreading it around the potager. There is a vestige, though, and it may not always have been a vegetable garden, I think. There's one vine up against the wall of the building, along the wall, along the garden wall, and up the gable a little bit, along the length of the gable. It doesn't really go up because there's nothing to train it to. It's one of those really old, thick vines. It does produce grapes, but not really very many. It's just kept there as a vestige. There are a few regimented lines of vines, perhaps 18 metres by 8 metres, 2 on either side of the road, but they're owned by the council, the mairie. They're only really kept there as a historic reminder of the Archbishop's vineyards that used to cover much more of the gentle slopes of the prairie, lower alpine slopes of the valley. There's a problem with even them, though. There's the brown leaves, some sort of thing, but no one really seems to know what's wrong with them. Perhaps there's bodies buried under of the Archbishop's victims, vampires that the patriarchal clergy were. A similar sort of batch area. Perhaps there's a vineyard for a fair chunk of its life that's potager. But there's frosts. It's not really the best place for a vineyard. Optimum, certainly not. Arbin does okay though as a vineyard. Perhaps they were just religious about their husbandry, clipping and covering them in hessian. But does that tend to suggest, if there was this vineyard, that it was a property of the Archbishop or the chateau owner? It's one of those very ancient sort of fortified looking chateaus rather than a pretty Renaissance-inspired thing. But it's got a turret or two, sort of. There's a few churches, but the church on the ridge above me is much prettier, and it's sort of Romanesque type. The fancy dome of the bell tower is sort of the same sort of carpentry underneath that people built when they were coming as journeymen from Romania, in so many places in Germany and France. But I'm going to get back to vampires and flights of fancy if I'm not careful, so we'll move on. The 2 double-groined vaults are in good order. There's a little bit of pitting. I can't help but wonder if that's where little bits of feldspar have fallen out. There's once a glittering reflective ceiling in there. Summer light comes through the cute little windows. This lowest level has cute little windows like the other demise. Rockfall is a risk around here, which you have as a search in your documents. But the very lightest of the most sandable skim-like polyfiller tub, 25 litres would do it over the 2 4x6 metre area before painting. But what paint to use? There's an irregular lime render just on the back wall that's completely submerged. I'm quite nervous about intervening in this at all. I've got this horrible feeling that if I take off this ancient weathered protective skin, that there's going to be some Alpine spring of water coming out through the back wall. Constant 6 degrees C down here, lots of insulation going to have to go on the back inside of that duck your head door, but while the warmth partly comes from the bedrock floor, just the same as it would from any ground source heat pump, it's going to have to be insulated. Mainly because it generates a humidity rather than being below the water table or anything. It contributes to the waft that you get as you open the door in the summer. That's quickly ventilated. Just above the lintel there's a hole, which was clearly where another bit of tree used to poke out. Above that there's a door that would have been like a platform, like a balcony, rudimentary balcony, but balcony all the same, to the hay baling shortcut. But no real sign of any hook fixing point and pulley. But it's a public road now, this little fackle, as they say. I would love to exaggerate the precedence of this little balcony thing. Loading stump to a resistant swimming pool with glass sides that extends out over the road, perhaps in cantilever fashion. As far as the 3-metre drop retaining wall of that road,
By means of charity
swim there and watch down valley views. But I do have to work to pay for all these plans. I'm thinking where there's a big British community, there's jobs. Chauffeur driving people to their ski resorts from the airport. Chalet hosting jobs, possibly maintenance type jobs for those chalet communities. Yes, I might even go for, well, my French would have to be good enough to get an electrician's course and licence, wouldn't it? Even after I've done all of my own a few times over. But more about that. The trials of getting the ERDF coffret connected. And the very pleasant Consuel Inspector some of the time. By proxy. J'ai perdu mon vieux défaut de trouver bizarre. Pitchforks, quite a few of those, but the whole grange would have been full of hay, second floor level, even the waney-edged 1.5-inch thick floorboards that span a metre, quite happily, ingrained with the stuff. How long the dry sawdust that's been in one of the byres has been there, you can't know. Sawdust curls don't really deteriorate, though, it would seem. And kincallury. This is like the ironmongery around windows and shutters. There were shutters on the dozen windows by the looks of the fittings, but no windows to the openings, I should be saying. There's still the right angle groove into solid lime, pure lime edgings that the shutters would fold against to give it a tight fit that doesn't bang, basically. You don't want banging in your barn, do you? Or perhaps you do. The ironwork, though, when you see it on display in like a bricko, it looks like devices of torture if you're not familiar with window opening functional kincallury. There was no real hidden treasure, though, anywhere. Just the place itself, of course. And the l'histoire it has to tell. Ironwork was definitely of better quality in olden days, though. There was more kincallury from the now defunct woodwork from the openings than there was around the local barmaid's face and person. The flat L brackets get used on the face on each of the corners as like a reinforcement to the joints, the wood joints. But it's the size of the shutter and the weight, and with what I've got replacing it, the double glazing weight. British hinges on frames are so easy and you just don't appreciate them when you haven't got them. So granite stones you'd have to diamond drill into to get any sort of fixing, or put them in the mortar joints at very irregular, odd spacings. Pin and socket, I'll describe them as. There's a pin that goes into the stonework, screws in, and then a pin sticks out vertically. And onto this you hook the socket, which is simple enough if it's a small window and there's one or two, but what if there's 3 or 4 of them? You'll find that the screw action, it's very important if it's in or out, just a millimetre or two, which just means that you're weakening the bond in the mortar, making it sloppy before you even add the weight to it. I don't know what period of time they must have to wait for the mortar to go off before they can attempt to hang the shutters, but at least it's chunkier ironwork than I'd be able to feasibly replace it with. I think perhaps the tolerances are a bit more tolerant of real-world situations. The socket and the pin don't fit into each other quite so tightly as the plastic-lined ones from a double glazing, but so awkward. the inflating wedge thing, like you do like a ball pump that you pump with your fingers. People can break into cars when they've locked their keys inside with these things. Didn't help. I don't think another person and another pair of hands would help either. You'd just be fighting against each other on micro movements. It's just allow yourself time, get comfortable, lift that weight, and be patient. Be prepared to try again. I think there's going to be plenty of that over this build. Oh, and floor to ceiling height 3-point locks on barn doors. Oh, we'll have to save that till another time. It's like a key, like you have on a safe. People look at you really dodgy when you're trying to have another one cut or altered or made longer in Britain. Only a commonplace in France. You might have seen them on a big Paris apartment door.